Sometimes the galaxy likes to play practical jokes on scientists who think they know what they're doing. Vera had spent the better part of a decade studying xenobiology, dreaming of the day humanity would make first contact with an intelligent alien species. She'd imagined peaceful exchanges of knowledge, maybe some awkward translation mishaps, perhaps a few cultural misunderstandings that would make for amusing anecdotes at academic conferences. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What she hadn't imagined was bleeding profusely in the medical bay of the research vessel Meridian's Edge, while Captain Walsh paced behind her like a caged tiger, muttering creative profanities that would make a space pirate blush. "Tell me again," Walsh growled, his weathered face twisted into what could generously be called a scowl. "How exactly you managed to get your hand nearly chewed off by our honored guest." Vera winced as the medical drone finished sealing the puncture wounds on her left hand. 2 deep gouges ran from her knuckles to her wrist, courtesy of what appeared to be needle-sharp teeth that could punch through military-grade fabric like it was tissue paper. The local anesthetic was wearing off, and her hand throbbed with each heartbeat. "It wasn't exactly a social call, Walsh," she muttered, flexing her bandaged fingers experimentally. "And technically, it didn't chew. More of a precision bite." "Precision bite," Walsh repeated flatly. "Right, because that makes it so much better." The whole mess had started 18 hours ago when they'd picked up a distress signal from the outer edge of the Void Nebula. The signal was weak, fragmented, and broadcasting on frequencies that no known species used, which, naturally, meant every xenobiologist in the fleet had started salivating over the possibility of first contact. Vera had been the lucky one on duty when the signal came through. She'd spent 6 hours trying to decode the transmission pattern while the Meridian's Edge adjusted course toward the source. What she'd found wasn't a language exactly, but something that resembled mathematical progressions mixed with what could only be described as emotional resonance patterns. The source turned out to be a crashed vessel of completely unknown design, drifting dead in space with minimal life support. Long-range scans had detected one life sign aboard, faint but stable. The ship itself was a work of art, all flowing curves and organic-looking hull plating that seemed to shift color depending on the viewing angle. "Beautiful," Walsh had admitted when they'd first laid eyes on it. "Also, probably booby-trapped 6 ways from Sunday." He hadn't been wrong about the booby traps. The boarding party had triggered some kind of defensive system the moment they'd cut through the outer hull. Fortunately, instead of explosions or toxic gas, the defense had been more along the lines of really annoying sonic pulses that made everyone's teeth ache. They'd found the survivor in what appeared to be the ship's control center, curled up in an alcove that might have been a pilot's seat or possibly a medical bay. It was hard to tell with alien technology. The creature itself had been, well, calling it beautiful would have been accurate. Calling it terrifying would have been equally accurate. It stood about 4 feet tall, with a lean, predatory build that reminded Vera uncomfortably of a cross between a large cat and something that belonged in humanity's primordial nightmares. Its skin was covered in what looked like scales, but closer examination revealed they were more like overlapping plates of some chitinous material that shifted from deep purple to silver green depending on the light. 4 arms sprouted from its torso, each ending in hands that possessed 6 fingers tipped with those infamous needle-sharp claws. The head was the real showstopper, though, elongated and elegant, with large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to hold an unsettling intelligence. The mouth was small, almost delicate-looking, which made the double row of razor-sharp teeth all the more disturbing when it opened. Definitely predatory, Vera had noted, keeping her distance while the security team established a perimeter. Look at those eyes, the muscle development, the claw structure. This thing is built to hunt. And kill, added Lieutenant Hayes, who was doing his best to look professional, despite the fact that his hands were shaking slightly on his pulse rifle. Should we sedate it? The creature had been unconscious when they'd found it, apparently suffering from some kind of injury or illness. Its breathing was labored, and there were what looked like infected wounds along its left side. Whatever had happened to its ship, the occupant hadn't escaped unscathed. No sedatives yet, Vera had decided. We don't know enough about its physiology. Could kill it accidentally. Famous last words, as it turned out. The creature had regained consciousness while they were setting up the portable containment field. One moment, it was lying still as death. The next, it was on its feet, and moving with a speed that made Vera's training kick in about half a second too late. It hadn't attacked the security team, which surprised everyone. Instead, it had focused entirely on Vera, moving toward her with what could only be described as deliberate intent. No wild thrashing, no panic response, just smooth, predatory motion that suggested a level of intelligence that made her pulse quicken with excitement rather than fear. Right up until it bit her. The attack, if it could be called that, had been almost surgical in its precision. The creature had reached out with one of its four arms, grasped her left hand with surprising gentleness, and then opened its mouth to reveal those gleaming rows of teeth. Vera had frozen, partly from shock and partly from scientific fascination. This was first contact, after all, even if first contact involved being used as a chew toy. The bite itself had lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough for those needle teeth to punch through her gloves and draw blood, but short enough that she got the distinct impression it could have done much worse if it had wanted to. Then it had released her and stepped back, watching her reaction with those unsettling, multifaceted eyes. "Well," she had said, looking down at her bleeding hand with the sort of detached calm that usually preceded shock. "That's new." The security team had immediately moved to restrain the creature, but Vera had held up her uninjured hand to stop them. Something in the alien's posture suggested this hadn't been an attack in the traditional sense. More like a test, maybe? Or some kind of greeting ritual that humans weren't equipped to understand. "Stand down," she'd ordered, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I don't think it meant to hurt me." "It bit you," Hayes had pointed out reasonably. "There's blood. Lots of blood." "Yes, but look at it," Vera had insisted, nodding toward the creature. "It's not acting aggressive. If it wanted to kill me, I think I'd be dead already." The alien had tilted its head at her words, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw something that might have been curiosity in those strange eyes. That had been 18 hours ago. Since then, the creature had been housed in a converted cargo bay with full life support and what the medical team generously called appropriate accommodations, which mostly meant a bunch of padding on the floor and some water dispensers that it had ignored completely. "So, what's your professional opinion, Doctor?" Walsh asked, settling into a chair beside Vera's medical bed with the sort of resigned expression that suggested he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Vera flexed her bandaged hand again, considering. The bite wounds were clean, precise, and showed signs of some kind of natural antiseptic in the creature's saliva that was actually helping them heal faster than normal. Hardly the mark of a mindless predator. "I think," she said slowly, "we're dealing with something a lot more intelligent than we initially assumed. The bite wasn't random violence. It was communication, maybe, or information gathering. Information gathering, Walsh repeated. Right. So it bit you to learn about human physiology? Or to learn about human responses to pain? Or to test our defensive capabilities? Or maybe, Vera paused, struck by a sudden thought, to see if we were predators too. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Come again? Think about it, Vera said, warming to the theory. We board its ship, surround it with armed personnel, and start poking at it with instruments. From its perspective, we might look like a hunting pack. The bite could have been its way of testing whether we'd respond with violence or intelligence. And our response was? We provided medical attention and didn't immediately retaliate, which probably sent a very specific message about human nature. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, digesting this. Finally, he shook his head. You realize what you're suggesting, right? That this thing is smart enough to conduct psychological experiments on us? Vera met his gaze steadily. I'm suggesting that we might be dealing with a species that's at least as intelligent as we are, and possibly more sophisticated in ways we don't understand yet. The question is, what do we do about it? Before Walsh could answer, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain, to the bridge, came the voice of their navigation officer. Priority 1. We've got incoming ships on long-range sensors, and they're not broadcasting human identification codes. Walsh was on his feet immediately, his expression shifting from resigned to alert. How many ships? Looks like a full battle group, sir. At least 12 vessels, possibly more. And Captain? They're heading straight for us. Vera felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. She looked toward the cargo bay, where their mysterious guest was being held, and suddenly the creature's presence on their ship took on an entirely different significance. Walsh, she said quietly, I think our new friend might not be a survivor after all. What do you mean? Vera's bandaged hand throbbed as she clenched it into a fist. I think we might have just rescued a refugee. Nothing quite prepares you for the moment when you realize the monster in your cargo hold might be the good guy. Vera had spent the last 6 hours hunched over her workstation, trying to make sense of the biological samples she'd managed to collect from their guest before it had decided to use her hand as a conversation starter. The creature's physiology was unlike anything in the xenobiology databases, which wasn't entirely surprising, given that they were dealing with humanity's first confirmed contact with alien intelligence. What was surprising were the readings she was getting from the bioscans. Walsh, you need to see this, she called, not looking up from her display as the captain entered her lab. Her bandaged hand made typing awkward, but she'd learned to compensate over the past few hours. Please tell me you've figured out how to communicate with our toothy friend, Walsh said, settling into the chair beside her workstation. Because those incoming ships are maintaining course and speed, and I'm starting to think they're not here for a friendly chat. Vera pulled up a 3-dimensional model of the creature's nervous system, highlighting specific areas in bright blue. Look at this. See the neural density in the frontal cortex region? And these bioelectric patterns running through what I think are sensory organs? Walsh squinted at the display. I see pretty lights. What am I supposed to be looking at? Intelligence, Vera said simply. Specifically, intelligence that's organized completely differently from human cognition, but shows complexity markers that suggest advanced reasoning capabilities. This isn't just smart, Walsh. This is potentially genius-level intelligence wrapped up in a predator's body. Wonderful. So we've got a super-intelligent alien with a fondness for human fingers locked in our cargo bay. That's not the interesting part. Vera switched to a different display, this one showing electromagnetic spectrum analysis. Watch this. These are the readings I took during our first encounter. The display showed waves of bioelectric activity emanating from the creature, pulsing in complex patterns that seemed to respond to external stimuli. As Walsh watched, the patterns shifted and changed, forming what looked almost like, "Are those communication attempts?" he asked. "That's what I thought initially." But look at this. Vera overlaid her own bioelectric readings from the same time period. The creature wasn't just broadcasting. It was responding to my nervous system patterns, reading them, maybe even interpreting them. Walsh leaned back in his chair, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "You're saying it can read minds?" "Not minds exactly. More like emotional states, stress levels, maybe even intent. Think of it as biological lie detection taken to an extreme level." Vera paused, struck by a sudden realization. "Walsh, what if the bite wasn't random? What if it was gathering biological data about human physiology and psychology? So it bit you to learn about us? Or to learn about me specifically? My reactions, my pain tolerance, my fear responses?" Vera's bandaged hand throbbed as if in response to her words. From its perspective, that bite might have been the equivalent of a detailed medical and psychological examination. Before Walsh could respond, the ship's communication system activated. "Captain, priority alert. The incoming fleet has begun transmitting on multiple frequencies. Universal Translator is having trouble with the language, but we're getting some partial translations. Patch it through to Dr. Vera's lab," Walsh ordered. The speaker crackled for a moment, then filled with what sounded like multiple voices speaking in overlapping harmony. The Universal Translator struggled with the alien syntax, producing a disjointed stream of words that gradually began to form coherent phrases. "Surrender the war criminal, violation of Dominion law, harboring fugitive entity, immediate compliance required." Vera and Walsh exchanged glances. "War criminal?" Vera muttered. "Our guest is wanted for something. Genetic deviant, unauthorized intelligence enhancement, crimes against natural order, return to Dominion custody for processing." The transmission cut off, leaving them in silence. Walsh was the first to speak. "Well, that's just fantastic. We've managed to pick up an alien war criminal." Vera was already pulling up the bioscan data again, her mind racing. "Walsh, what if they have it backwards? What if the crime isn't something our guest did, but something that was done to it?" "What do you mean?" "Look at these neural patterns again. See how they're organized. This isn't natural evolution. This is engineered enhancement. Someone or something modified this creature's intelligence, probably against its will." Walsh studied the displays, his expression growing grimmer. "You think they turned it into a weapon? Or they tried to. But intelligence enhancement doesn't always work the way you expect it to. Sometimes making something smarter also makes it more capable of understanding concepts like freedom and resistance." A soft chime indicated an incoming message on Vera's personal workstation. She frowned, checking the sender identification. "That's strange. This is coming from inside the ship." She opened the message and immediately felt her blood pressure spike. The screen showed a crude but recognizable drawing of the cargo bay layout, with stick figures representing the security guards and a more detailed sketch of the creature itself. Beneath the drawing was a series of symbols that meant nothing to human eyes, but the intent was clear. Someone was communicating with their guest. "How the hell did it access our computer systems?" Walsh demanded. Vera was already running diagnostics on her workstation. "It didn't. This message was transmitted using bioelectric pulses that got picked up by the ship's electromagnetic sensors and converted to data. She paused, impressed despite herself. It figured out our technology well enough to hack it using biological signals. Can you respond? Maybe. If I can figure out how to modulate the ship's electromagnetic field to... Vera trailed off, her fingers dancing over the control interface. Actually, let me try something simpler first. She stood up, ignoring Walsh's questioning look, and headed for the door. Where are you going? He called after her. To have a conversation. The cargo bay that housed their guest had been converted into a makeshift habitat, complete with atmospheric controls, gravity regulation, and enough security monitoring equipment to track a small army. Vera could see the creature through the observation window, standing in the center of the bay with its back to the door. It was larger than she'd remembered, and the way it held itself suggested coiled strength that could be unleashed at a moment's notice. All four arms were visible, and she could see the muscle definition that spoke of a physiology designed for violence. She also noticed that it was drawing something on the floor, using what appeared to be its own claw tips. I'm going in, she announced to the security team. Doctor, with respect, that's not advisable, Lieutenant Hayes said. The creature has already demonstrated hostile behavior toward you specifically. It demonstrated communication behavior, Vera corrected. There's a difference. She keyed in her authorization code and stepped through the airlock before anyone could stop her. The creature turned at the sound of the doctor cycling, those multifaceted eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. For a moment, neither of them moved. Vera could hear her own heartbeat in the silence, and she was acutely aware that she was standing within arm's reach of something that could probably kill her without breaking a sweat. Then the creature did something unexpected. It stepped backward, giving her space, and gestured toward the drawings it had been making on the floor. Vera looked down and felt her breath catch. The drawings were incredibly detailed, showing what appeared to be star charts with specific systems marked in different symbols. Some symbols were colored in what looked like dried blood. Others in a darker substance she couldn't identify. You're trying to tell me something, she said aloud, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping it might pick up on her tone. The alien tilted its head, then reached out with one of its four arms. Vera tensed, remembering the bite, but this time the gesture was different. The creature extended its hand palm up, in what any human would recognize as a peaceful offering. Vera looked at the outstretched hand, then at her own bandaged fingers. Every instinct screamed at her to back away, to call for security, to treat this as the dangerous situation it obviously was. Instead, she took a step forward. The creature's bioelectric field intensified as she approached, and Vera could actually feel the electromagnetic radiation prickling against her skin. Up close, the alien's natural patterns were even more complex than her instruments had suggested, swirling and pulsing in rhythms that seemed almost musical. She extended her uninjured hand toward the creature's outstretched palm, moving slowly to avoid triggering any defensive responses. The moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Images flooded her mind, not visual exactly, but more like compressed emotional experiences that her brain struggled to translate into something comprehensible. She saw flashes of other worlds, other creatures that looked similar to her guest, but somehow different. She felt overwhelming grief, burning anger, and beneath it all, a desperate, clawing need for something she couldn't identify. And then, cutting through the chaos like a blade, came pain. The creature suddenly gripped her hand with inhuman strength and bit down on her wrist with those needle-sharp teeth. The bite was harder this time, deeper, drawing more blood and sending waves of agony up her arm. But even through the pain, Vera could sense that this wasn't an attack. The creature was trying to tell her something, using the only communication method that had worked before. She forced herself to remain calm, to focus on the bioelectric patterns flowing between them rather than the physical pain. And gradually, the message became clear. The creature was dying, not from injury or illness, but from something far worse. The neural modifications that had enhanced its intelligence were breaking down, causing cascading failures throughout its nervous system. The pain it was experiencing was beyond anything human physiology could endure, and it was getting worse. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the approaching Dominion fleet wasn't coming to recapture a war criminal. They were coming to collect their property before it expired. Vera understood now why the creature had focused on her specifically, why it had been trying so desperately to communicate. It wasn't looking for help escaping or fighting back. It was looking for someone to witness what had been done to it, someone who might be able to warn others about what the Dominion was capable of. The creature released her hand and stepped back, and Vera could see exhaustion in every line of its body. It had used up most of its remaining energy just to share that brief contact, and the effort was clearly taking its toll. "I understand," she whispered, cradling her newly wounded hand against her chest. "I understand what they did to you." The alien's bioelectric field pulsed once, weakly, and then began to fade as it collapsed to its knees on the cargo bay floor. Vera was already shouting for medical assistance as she knelt beside the creature, but she knew it was probably too late. Whatever the Dominion had done to enhance this being's intelligence, they'd also turned it into a living weapon with a built-in expiration date. And now humanity was about to get a front-row seat to the kind of civilization they'd just made first contact with. If there's one thing humans excel at, it's making incredibly bad decisions at exactly the wrong time. The medical team had stabilized their guest, though stabilized was a generous term for someone whose nervous system was slowly eating itself from the inside out. Vera sat beside the creature in the converted medical bay, both her hands now bandaged and throbbing, watching the shallow rise and fall of its chest, while the ship's medical scanners provided a steady stream of increasingly depressing data. "Neural degradation is accelerating," Dr. Kim announced, studying the readouts with the sort of clinical detachment that medical professionals use to mask their helplessness. "At this rate, complete cognitive collapse will occur within 18 hours. "Can you slow it down?" Vera asked, though she already knew the answer from the doctor's expression. Not without understanding the enhancement process that caused it. And frankly, I'm not even sure we should try. The pain levels this creature must be experiencing are... Dr. Kim shook her head. "If this were a human patient, we'd be discussing palliative care." Vera looked down at the alien, noting how its bioelectric field had dimmed to barely perceptible levels. The vibrant patterns that had filled her mind during their contact were now reduced to faint, erratic pulses that spoke of a consciousness fighting against inevitable shutdown. "It's not just dying," she said quietly. "It's being murdered by its own intelligence." The creature's multifaceted eyes opened at the sound of her voice, focusing on her with what little awareness remained. One of its 4 arms moved weakly, as if trying to reach for her, then fell back to the medical table. "Dr. Vera to the bridge," Walsh's voice crackled over the communication system. "Priority 1. Vera reluctantly left the medical bay and made her way to the bridge, where she found Walsh staring grimly at the main display. The Dominion fleet had closed to visual range, and the ships were unlike anything in human military databases. They looked more grown than built, with organic curves and what appeared to be living hull plating that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "They're beautiful," Vera admitted grudgingly. "They're also armed to the teeth and demanding we prepare for boarding," Walsh replied. "They want our guest transferred to their custody within the hour, or they'll take it by force." "And if we refuse?" Walsh gestured to the tactical display, where red indicators showed the Dominion ships taking attack positions around the meridian's edge. "Then we get to find out how well our shields hold up against weapons that appear to be based on directed biological warfare." Before Vera could respond, the main communication array activated, filling the bridge with that same harmonic chorus they'd heard before. This time, however, the universal translator seemed to be having better luck with the syntax. "Human vessel, you harbor stolen property of the Dominion Science Collective. The enhanced specimen designated Flame that Burns Tyrants must be returned immediately for proper disposal." Vera felt something cold settle in her stomach. Disposal? "Enhanced specimens are temporary research tools," the voice continued. "This unit has exceeded its useful operational period and poses a contamination risk to nearby populations. Compliance with retrieval protocols is mandatory." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Vera found herself thinking about the images the creature had shared with her, the overwhelming grief and anger that had flooded through their bioelectric connection. "Walsh," she said slowly, "what if I told you that our guest isn't a war criminal, but a victim of medical experimentation? I'd say that doesn't change the fact that we're outnumbered 12-1 by ships that could probably vaporize us without breaking a sweat. And what if I told you that the Dominion has been systematically enhancing the intelligence of various species, using them as weapons, and then killing them when the modifications become unstable?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display. "I'd say that sounds like something humanity might want to take a stand against, assuming we survive long enough to tell anyone about it. So we're not handing over our guest? Hell no. But we're also not going to win a shooting match with these bastards." Walsh turned to the navigation officer. "How long until we can jump to hyperspace?" "Engines are still cycling from our last jump, Captain. At least another hour before we can safely engage the drive." "An hour we don't have." Walsh rubbed his forehead, clearly running through options that all led to unpleasant conclusions. "Vera, is there any way to communicate with the Dominion? Maybe negotiate some kind of compromise?" Before Vera could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical display lit up with new contacts as a massive vessel dropped out of hyperspace directly between the Meridian's edge and the Dominion fleet. "What the hell is that?" Walsh demanded. The new arrival was even more organic-looking than the Dominion ships, but where they were elegant and predatory, this vessel looked like it had been grown rather than built. Thick, branch-like structures extended from a central core, and the entire ship pulsed with the same bioelectric patterns Vera had learned to associate with their guest. "It's a rescue ship," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. "They came for their friend." The communication array activated again, but this time the voice was different. Still harmonic, but with a warmer quality that made the Dominion transmissions sound cold and mechanical by comparison. "Human vessel, this is the ship Growing Light in Darkness of the Free Kethvar Resistance. We have come to retrieve our lost pack member. Please prepare for emergency extraction." Walsh looked at Vera, then at the tactical display where the Dominion ships were moving to intercept the newcomer. "I don't suppose you have any idea what we just got ourselves into." "A war," Vera said simply. "We just got ourselves into a war." The Dominion fleet opened fire without warning, sending streams of what looked like living energy toward the Resistance ship. The growing light in darkness responded with weapons that Vera couldn't even begin to classify, sending spiraling patterns of destructive force that seemed to bend space itself. "All hands, battle stations," Walsh announced over the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill." Vera was already heading for the door. "I need to get back to our guest." "Vera, wait!" Walsh called after her. "If this goes badly, if we don't make it out of this—" "We will," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "We have to." She made it back to the medical bay just as the ship shuddered under weapons fire. The creature was awake now, its bioelectric field pulsing in rapid, urgent patterns that made Vera's skin tingle with proximity feedback. "Your friends are here," she told it, settling into the chair beside the medical table. "They came for you." The alien's multifaceted eyes focused on her, and she could see something that might have been gratitude in their depths. It raised one of its 4 arms, the motion shaky but deliberate, and extended its hand toward her. Vera looked at the outstretched appendage, then at her own twice-bitten hands. She thought about the pain of those previous contacts, the overwhelming sensations that had flooded her mind, the very real possibility that a third contact might be more than her nervous system could handle. The ship shook again, more violently this time, and the lights flickered as the power grid strained under the demands of combat. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the high-pitched whine of the Meridian's Edge's defensive systems charging up. The creature's bioelectric field pulsed once, weakly, and Vera realized this might be their last chance to communicate. Whatever the alien wanted to tell her, whatever final message it had for humanity, this was the moment. She reached out and grasped the creature's hand with both of her own. The contact was different this time. Instead of the chaotic flood of images and emotions she'd experienced before, there was clarity, purpose. The creature's failing nervous system focused all its remaining energy into one final transmission, and what Vera received was nothing less than a complete briefing on the galactic political situation humanity had just stumbled into. The Kethvar had once been a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their bioelectric communication abilities and their skill at diplomatic mediation. The Dominion had captured them not for their physical capabilities, but for their mental ones. Intelligence enhancement had been the goal, creating a race of living computers capable of processing vast amounts of strategic data. It had worked, but not in the way the Dominion expected. The enhanced Kethvar hadn't become obedient tools. They'd become resistance fighters with the intellectual capacity to understand exactly what was being done to them and the determination to fight back. The war had been going on for decades, fought in the shadows while the rest of the galaxy remained unaware of the Dominion's true nature. Dozens of species had been subjected to similar enhancement programs, creating an underground network of rebels united by their shared victimization. And now, humanity had made first contact not with peaceful explorers or hostile invaders, but with the victims of a genocide that spanned light years and involved technologies that could reshape the nature of consciousness itself. The creature's grip tightened on her hands, and Vera felt a final surge of bioelectric energy flow between them. But this time, instead of receiving information, she was giving it. The alien was downloading everything it could about human physiology, psychology, and culture, storing the data in some kind of biological memory bank that would survive even if its consciousness didn't. When the contact ended, the creature slumped back onto the medical table, its bioelectric field fading to almost nothing. But its eyes remained focused on Vera, and she could see satisfaction in their depths. It had accomplished what it came to do. The ship's communication system crackled to life. "Dr. Vera, report to Cargo Bay 2 immediately. We're getting ready to transfer our guest." Vera stood up on unsteady legs, her hands now numb from the intensity of the bioelectric contact. "I have to go," she told the alien. "Your people are waiting." The creature's mouth moved, and for a moment she thought it was trying to speak. Then she realized it was doing something else entirely. It was smiling. As she headed for the cargo bay, Vera found herself wondering if humanity was ready for what was coming next. The galaxy, it turned out, was a much more complicated and dangerous place than anyone had imagined. And they'd just chosen a side in a war they didn't even know was happening. The cargo bay was chaos wrapped in emergency lighting and seasoned with the acrid smell of overloaded power systems. The growing light in darkness had managed to dock with the Meridian's edge, despite ongoing weapons fire from the Dominion fleet, using some kind of biological interface that made Vera's skin crawl just looking at it. Tendrils of living metal had extended from the alien vessel and burrowed into their hull, creating an airtight seal that pulsed with the same bioelectric patterns she'd learned to associate with the Kethvar. "How long do we have?" Walsh asked the moment she entered the bay. "Not long," came the reply from Lieutenant Hayes, who was monitoring the tactical situation from a portable command console. "The Dominion ships are repositioning for a concentrated assault. They want to finish this before any more resistance vessels show up." Through the organic airlock came creatures that looked similar to their guest, but healthier, their bioelectric fields bright and vibrant in ways that spoke of unmodified nervous systems. They moved with purpose and efficiency that suggested military training, but their attention was focused entirely on the medical transport unit containing their dying comrade. One of them approached Vera directly, its multifaceted eyes studying her with obvious intelligence. When it spoke, the words came through a translation device that turned its bioelectric pulses into accented but understandable English. "You are the one who listened," it said, the voice carrying harmonics that made her bones vibrate slightly. "Pack leader who trusted first. Our lost one has spoken of you." Vera blinked, surprised by the formal title. "I just tried to understand what it was telling me." "You did more than that. You accepted pain to receive truth. This is not common among the species we have encountered." The alien gestured toward its medical team, who were carefully transferring their dying comrade to a more advanced life support system. "Because of your actions, important information will survive. Information that may help end this war." Walsh stepped forward, his expression grim. "About that war, are you asking humanity to pick a side?" The Kethvar turned those unsettling eyes toward him. "We ask nothing. The Dominion will make the choice for you. They do not tolerate witnesses to their crimes." As if summoned by those words, the ship shook under a concentrated barrage that made the hull plating groan ominously. Sparks flew from an overloaded power conduit, and the lights flickered toward failure. "We need to go," Hayes announced. "Hull integrity is down to 60%. "Take us with you," Vera said suddenly, the words surprising her as much as everyone else. "The Dominion won't stop hunting us now. We know too much." The Kethvar resistance fighter tilted its head, considering. "Your species is untested in war. You have no experience with the weapons and tactics the Dominion employs." "But we have something else," Walsh said, understanding dawning in his expression. "We have the one thing that's been missing from your resistance movement. Which is fresh perspective. A species the Dominion hasn't broken yet." Walsh looked at Vera, then back at the alien. "How many member species in your resistance have been subjected to enhancement programs?" "All of them. Every species that fights the Dominion does so because they were first victimized by it." "Then you've all been fighting as victims," Vera realized. "But we're not victims yet. We can fight as something else, entirely. The ship lurched as something massive impacted the hull. Emergency klaxons began wailing, and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. "Decide quickly," the Kethvar said. "We must leave now or risk capture." Vera looked around the cargo bay, at the human crew preparing for evacuation, at the alien resistance fighters who had risked everything to rescue one of their own. She thought about the images the dying Kethvar had shared with her, the systematic brutalization of entire civilizations in the name of scientific advancement. "Walsh," she said, "what's the crew vote on abandoning our ship to join an alien resistance movement?" "Unanimous," he replied without hesitation. Apparently watching someone torture a sentient being to death has a way of clarifying moral positions. The evacuation took exactly 8 minutes, with human crew members grabbing essential equipment and personal belongings, while the Kethvar medical team worked to keep their dying comrades stable. Vera was among the last to cross the organic airlock, carrying a portable data storage unit containing every bit of information they'd gathered about Dominion technology and tactics. As the growing light in darkness detached from the meridian's edge, Vera found herself standing beside the medical pod containing the enhanced Kethvar that had started this whole mess. Its bioelectric field was barely detectable now, but its eyes were still open, still aware. "Thank you," she whispered, placing her hand against the transparent aluminum of the medical pod. The creature's field pulsed once, weakly, and then went dark. 6 months later, Vera stood in the council chamber of the resistance base hidden in the nebula veil, addressing representatives from 14 different species. Her scarred hands had become something of a legend among the resistance fighters, a symbol of the human willingness to accept pain in pursuit of understanding. "The Dominion expects us to fight like victims," she told the assembled delegates, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "They expect us to react with fear and desperation because that's all they've ever seen from enhanced species. But humanity brings something new to this war." She paused, thinking of a dying alien who had trusted her enough to share its pain. "We bring the perspective of a species that chose to fight back, not because we were broken, but because we saw others being broken and decided that was unacceptable." The council chamber erupted in harmonics and bioelectric displays that the translation systems rendered as unanimous approval. Through the chamber's viewport, Vera could see the resistance fleet preparing for the largest coordinated strike in the war's history. Behind her, barely visible in the chamber's dim lighting, a figure that had grown considerably larger over the past 6 months watched with multifaceted eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. The creature that had once been known as Flame That Burns Tyrants had survived its neural degradation through experimental medical procedures that no one fully understood. It had also begun referring to Vera by a new title, Pack Leader Who Trusted First. Some bonds, it seemed, transcended species barriers, even the ones formed through strategic biting.